Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. Paris is on a collision course with Brussels and Berlin over its budget deficit. Under new, stricter rules, it could even be forced to pay huge fines that run into the billions because it did not meet its budget deficit targets as spelled out by eurozone members. With us to talk about it, French Socialist Member of Parliament Philippe Cordery, from the left wing of the same Socialist Party, John Palassin, former advisor to the recently sacked Economy Minister Arno Montebourg. Joining us also, Alexis Poulain, director of the online media platform Euractiv France, and Jakob Hessler, startup entrepreneur, a German who works here in France. It seems like an easy choice for Paris, as described in part one of our discussion by Philippe Cordery. Either you upset the voters by breaking the pledge not to raise taxes any further, or you upset Brussels. Well, the government seems to be choosing option 2. Yuka Royer reports.
No more belt tightening and especially no tax hikes. Despite France's ballooning public deficit, the government is unwilling to budge.
Do you think we're going to tax people more money? Saving 21 billion euros was already difficult enough. When we're initiating lower taxes, do you think we're now going to turn around and say, no, they're going to increase? No.
Last week, Paris unveiled its new budget for next year. The plan includes billions of euros in wide-ranging spending cuts on public healthcare, local administrations and the central government. But the budget deficit is still estimated at 4.3% of GDP, falling far short of the EU target of 3%. Under the EU's new tighter rules on debts that came into effect last year, members are obliged to reduce public deficit below the 3% mark by 2015. France now says it will meet the target, but in 2017. Tough negotiations lie ahead in Brussels, where the European Commission is set to be preparing to reject France's budget later this month. The same rule stipulates member states must get the EU to greenlight their budgets before their own parliaments. The face-off will come at a sensitive time. A decision to send the budget back to Paris would be the last act of the current Commission led by José Manuel Barroso. The new executive arm under Jean-Claude Juncker will include France's very own Pierre Moscovici.
All right, we can talk about Pierre Moscovici in a moment. In Parliament on Tuesday, the Prime Minister Manuel Valls saying he's confident that there isn't going to be a rejection in Brussels. Again, the question, I'll put it to you, Jakob Hessler. These new tighter rules, what are they worth if France gets away with it?
Well, I think they're as much worth as the rules before, and let's not forget this is a political process. So what they mean is that the symbolic cost of transgression is higher, and so they raise the bar in terms of what it means not meeting them. But as all rules, they're political, so they can be broken. And I think the real difficulty today is more what will the compromise look like? And I think we will get to one because we have the public spending program. The real problem is, or the real question is, how can you trust that if you give the French more leeway, that it won't slow down the pace of reform? So in a way, you give leeway in exchange for ensuring and accelerating the reforms, not only just cutting 10% here, 10% there, 10% there, because at some point you become anemic, but structural reforms for, reforming public service, etc., etc. And that would be, in my view, that's the battleground for the compromise, but there will be a compromise.
All right, lots of reactions coming in. Derek saying France is expected to comply with the EU rules pertaining to state budgeting requirements. John Palassin, rules are rules.
Well, rules are rules. That's what's worrying me at the moment, is that Europe, the European Union and the European project, of which France is one of the founders, is not just a bunch of rules. It's a political project. And I'm very much, I'm worried about the European situation, because that obsession about the rules, which I can understand, but that obsession about the rules is making a huge political damage to the European Union. I mean, you know how high the National Front was in France in the last elections. You know how desperate and how unpopular the European Union is in our countries. I mean, let's not let's not get things mixed up. The main political objective is a European Union which works, in which people will be
hang on a second. Both you and Philip Cordery have mentioned the National Front and how there's the specter of the National Front. But France signed on to join a common currency, which means that there have to be common rules among its members.
But of course, there are common rules, and that's why that's why a single currency is possible. But now it seems that something is flawed in the single currency, and something must be adapted to this situation. I mean, once again, we're repeating the same thing all the time, like Nobel Prize Paul Krugman, like Nobel Prize Joseph Stiglitz, like IMF, the head of the IMF. I mean, the economic policy must be adapted to the situation, the worst crisis since the 1929 crisis, and that 2008 crisis. We haven't recovered. We're not out of it yet. So let's think, what is the most important? To abide by the rules very strictly, to be good students, or to have an efficient economic policy with less people unemployed, and those unemployed people will be happy to vote for government parties and not for the National Front? I mean, let's think politically about the situation and not just about those rules.
All right, the vote expected this Wednesday for European commissioners, including, we saw it in that report, France's Pierre Moscovici, who in his audition before the EU Parliament went to great pains to insist that his French socialism was on the back burner.
My role here is not to be France's economy minister. I'm no longer that. I'm a European.
All right, the Pierre Moscovici there. Alexis Poulain, how's this going down in Brussels? The fact that the man whose job it is to make sure that France follows the rules is a former cabinet member of François Hollande.
It's not going that well. I think that the problem is that he had this sort of finance minister before, and now he's going to be sort of the Trojan horse of the French, just like Hill for the UK, on this particular commissioner role. He passed the audition, and then he had 22 written questions that were about his role and the fact that he had two vice presidents above him, and knowing what is it going to be his room for maneuver and his freedom here. So he's like a French under scrutiny in Brussels, and I think there was sort of sentiment of being annoyed by this nomination at this particular role of Pierre Moscovici.
That it was ill-timed.
France, yes.
Philip Cordery, some saying he's damaged goods, and that the man who will really be the watchdog who will be keeping eyes, the former Latvian prime minister, who will be one of the Commission's vice presidents.
Well, I don't think so, because, I mean, Pierre Moscovici has the authority on the administration. He's the commissioner in charge of economic and financial policy. The vice presidents are not directly linked to the administration. So I think Pierre Moscovici will have his hands. But let me say that I really regret what the European People's Party, the EPP, did in these hearings. And it's not really good for the image of the European Parliament. Because
that's the centre-right.
Centre-right, because, I mean, Pierre Moscovici did a very good hearing, and everyone has said that. I mean, on the contents, very professional, having the experience, very European, not there as a French person.
But you agree with Alexis that it's ill-timed, his candidacy coming up?
He's fit for the job, so I don't believe that he's, I mean, he will not do it correctly. But the fact that the Conservatives, I mean, played really with a Spanish guy who really has problems, and the guy is set to be commissioner for climate and had actions in a petrol company. So, I mean, there was a real problem, and they played one against the other, which I think really is not what should have been done. But if I could come back on the rules, because that's what Pierre Moscovici will have to do also as European Commissioner, is implement Stability and Growth Pact. It's not all stability, the rules, it's also growth. And if we're doing our part of the job in reducing the budget, the European Union today should do their part of the job in creating growth. And the Barroso Commission did not do that. So we really hope that the new Commission under Jean-Claude Juncker and with Pierre Moscovici will really have this growth pact which will enable our economy to get better. Because it's not only one single set of rules about the deficit, it's stability and growth.
John Palassin, I got to ask you a question. It was a bit out of the blue, or it caught a lot of people off guard when Arno Montebourg, who comes from the left wing of your party, was sacked as the economy minister. It came after he made remarks openly critical of the German government. And we've seen all the statements since by the new cabinet. And, well, do you find yourself wondering why Montebourg was sacked?
Well, he was very clear about the situation. First, he's not a representative of the left wing of the party. He's always been close to the gravity center of the party. He just spoke loudly about the economic policy which was carried out since 2012. One of the main problems we're seeing today in the figures is that France, since 2012, under the pressure of the European Union and of the situation, tried to do two things: to curb the debt curve and to restore the competitivity of French companies. And doing those two things at the same time, with very little margins in the budget, led us to a recessive policy, and with a deficit in 2014, which is worse than in 2013. And from the start, Arno Montebourg said that we could not do both, that the cutting in the spending should be done. We should restore the competitivity of French companies, but we couldn't also make extra cuts in the spending, because if not, it'll be too recessive.
And again, so I ask you again on that point, John. I ask you again on that point. Is his message and that of the cabinet, of the government that followed the one where he was sacked from, one and the same?
Yes, he was sacked because lack of discipline.
Well, he was sacked because lack of discipline. No, I mean, it's not. Once again, it's not a schoolyard. Ministers are not sacked because he resigned because there was a contradiction in the economic policy. It's to say that we cannot keep on making more cuts in spendings, raising taxes when the growth rate is where it is. We can't make things worse. It's the same problem as the question of the rules. We're in such a situation. The growth rate, we're on the brink of deflation. We must take that into account. I mean, all economists are saying that we're making major mistakes.
And is the current cabinet taking that into account?
I beg your pardon?
Is the current cabinet of Manuel Valls taking that into account?
Well, I hope they are. I don't know. I'm not there anymore. I hope they are.
Okay, well, there's two messages out of Paris this week. The French president in Milan for that jobs summit earlier telling the EU to adapt budgetary rigor to protect growth. And there was also the message from François Hollande's prime minister in London. He was speaking earlier this week to business leaders.
It's companies that create wealth and thus jobs. I even said this in Germany, and all the French press is waiting for me to say this in English here in the UK. Well, I'm going to disappoint them. I love businesses. It's important to say it here, in the city.
My government is pro-business.
My government is pro-business. John Palassin, how's that going down with Montebourg supporters?
Well, very well, because from the 6th of May 2012 until he left the government, him and his team had the most intimate, the closest relation with the French companies. We knew their technology challenges, we knew their economic situation. We fought to save and to strengthen French companies, the French businesses, as much as we could. It was our mission. He was the minister for industry, the minister for the real economy. So we were pro-business. The situation today is not being pro-business or not. It's to measure and to understand in which economic situation the European Union is.
Alexis Poulain, the perception from abroad of how the French have run things?
What do you mean, run things from the start or now, at the moment? Presently, I think the message goes well. And if Manuel Valls was in London, it's surely to reassure investors from the city, saying, come in France, we're here for growth and we love business. Now, the figures are still not there yet, and you had some UK boss saying, if you invest in France, please leave because this country is devastated. Which French bashing, I think, is coming to an end. And people understand that we are a big country and France has great industry and companies. My main concern is when the French government says we love businesses. I don't know what they mean by businesses, because we have to look at SMEs, startups, young entrepreneurs, small companies, very small caps, which is about 90% of the economic sectors. And when they say we love businesses, I think they have in mind the big EDF and big company, energy companies, industries, and bigger companies. I think there is, I don't know who will benefit from the CICE measure, if the small companies would benefit from that.
These tax credit measures.
Tax credit measures. I think they're made for the big businesses, not for the smaller ones.
Philippe Cordery?
I think it's a balanced, of course, because when Manuel Valls says he's pro-business, as it was said before, the government is pro-business, and the left has always been pro-business, so there's nothing new in that.
Of course, we remember François Hollande, the candidate, and saying that he was no friend of the banks and
of finance, which is different. It's not business. The real economy is business and always been supported. As you say, in business, it's from the small enterprises to the big enterprises. They all create jobs, and we're going to evaluate the tax cuts for the enterprises to see exactly where they went, but it seems that it's been quite evenly balanced between small enterprises and the big business. And it's all, of course, the SMEs that we need to help, and this is why we created also a public investment bank, so that they can have better access to credit, because they're the big job creators also. All the measures that have been taken from the beginning in 2012 have been to help the business world, because that's where jobs are created.
But the image, of course, of France abroad is of the 75% super tax on the people who earn more than €1 million.
It's for a year.
It's the argument over things like the French government weighing into the fight for the industrial company Alstom. It's the idea that there is this French superstate that meddles in the economy and that taxes a lot.
That we have a state that helps also business, because Alstom was to save the enterprises and to save jobs. So it's not anti-business. And what we're concerned about is the real economy, and sort of promoting the real economy, so that we can create growth and create jobs. And all the measures that have been taken since 2012 go in that direction. So there is an image problem maybe abroad, but we are here, and I'm here, and we're all here to sort of convince.
Alexis Poulain was saying that he's seeing the tail end of the French bashing. Jacob Hessler, in your day-to-day dealings, in your business, do you get a sense of that?
Well, sometimes. So we had the visit of the governor of Massachusetts a week ago in Paris with a trade delegation, and I'm currently investing in a life science company, and so he wants to attract life science business that come to Massachusetts. As it happened, our company is already in both places, and it was very interesting. They set a big program. It was spending $1 billion per year for 5 years. It sounded very much things we know. And one of the Americans that came asked me, so tell me, I'm investing in these startups. Is it possible to fire people in France? Is it true that he was asking all these questions. And what it leads me to think is that there's a question of consistency of message and of political leadership. That's what's lacking, or what has been lacking. I'm not saying it may be not lacking today, but we need the same message, the same story, and not a change in expectations every 3 to 6 months. That's what has been killing France, not just this government, it's all governments, is that the fact that tax policies are too much the flavor of the day or the month, and when some group complains, then they get this, and another group, I don't know, some farmers from Brittany burn some things, so suddenly, they get this. It's the unpredictability of the rules, and that they're too complicated, and then someone who goes out and stays on message day in, day out, in a way that is readable, comprehensible for people abroad. I think that's what's needed.
That we need to simplify the message, I completely agree, and this is why we have a minister on simplification, which is something new. But in the consistency, I think it's a little bit unfair, because François Hollande has been criticized for not changing policies after the elections or bad polls, and keeping the same direction. And I think it's just, that we need to keep the same direction, because we cannot change policy every 3 months, every 6 months. We have this balanced approach. The results are not coming yet, but we'll continue in that direction because we think it's the right direction.
All right. There's also the case of the foreign press, and you were saying the end of French bashing. We saw it on the front page of Tuesday's international edition of the New York Times, a flattering profile of France's new economy minister, 36-year-old Emmanuel Macron, a former Rothschild banker. The article talks about him and his dynamic team of young players. Let me ask you, John Palassin, an endorsement from the foreign press and from the Anglo-Saxon press, how does that sit with the rank and file of the Socialist Party?
You know, there are a lot of prejudices about France in the United States, a bit as there are prejudices about the United States and France, and the filter of the media sometimes gives strange results. I mean, there are also many articles saying how France is a strong country where there are so brilliant engineers. There's a lot of creativity, a very strong economy with a lot of depth in it. And many people don't ask if they can fire people. In France, I'm thinking of General Electric, for example, which is one of the American companies which has been in France for the most time. And I mean, I don't believe all those prejudices and the ideas which are on the headlines on the one-day paper. I believe in long-term policies which are implemented to make the situation of the people better.
All right, the long view is what matters. John Palassin, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank as well Philip Cordery for being with us, and Alexis Poulain, Jacob Hessler. Time now for the Media Watch segment of our show. All right, let's say hello to James Creedon.
Evening, Francois. So we've been looking at how the events in Kobani have been buzzing online and the media coverage. A look first at the Hurriyet Daily News, which has an English language version. Lots of photos of clashes across the country in the last 24 hours on their website, Francois. Of course, some 14 deaths there as a result of those clashes between Kurds, Islamists and Turkish police. So a lot of coverage in the Turkish media of those clashes. Elsewhere in, for example, Britain's Daily Mail, they're talking about clashes in Europe with a particular focus on Hamburg, where there were some 14 injuries following Kurdish clashes between Kurdish supporters and pro-Islamist or Islamic State organization groups. Meanwhile, Le Monde here in France is talking about a sub-prefect or a senior police officer who refused to allow a demonstration by Kurds along the port in Marseille. It has generated headlines because of his undiplomatic language, saying that the people of Marseille don't care about this, the French people have enough problems. And there had to be, I think it was an official police response saying that this police prefecture individual was not speaking on behalf of the French state. So it's certainly generating tensions in Europe as well, where people are trying to demonstrate in favour of the Kurds. Here's coverage as well in the Turkish press of Iran's strong pro-Kurdish stance. Iran slams the world's passivity over Kobani. And there's actually an official Iran Twitter account, Francois, at Iran. And you can see that the official account is using very much pro-Kurdish hashtags such as Save Kobani, etc.
Iran with its own Kurdish population.
Absolutely. So you can see that they're certainly not sitting on the fence on this one. Amateur footage also on websites such as The Guardian showing US-led airstrikes on Kobani, or alleging to show that. Meanwhile, Radio Free Europe has some interesting coverage as well. They're showing accounts that are pro-Kurdish accounts, claiming that an Islamic State operative, a commander by the name of Umar Shishani, had been killed by Kurdish militants, I guess, or an explosion. In any case, this is apparently the 6th time the Kurdish sources have claimed to have killed Shishani, and Islamic State organization militants on the Russian social network VKontakte ridiculed these particular claims. So claim and counterclaim about what's going on social media. Just one final image to finish with. These are Kurds, have some of the bravest women in the world. This Kurdish women essentially fighting here, I suppose, to keep Kobani free of Islamic State organisation militants.
All right, James Creedon, many thanks. There's much more to come in Media Watch. Much more to come here on France 24. I want to thank again our panel. Thank you for being with us. You're watching France 24.
Reporters. Following the terrible 2010 earthquake, a cholera epidemic ravaged Haiti. 700,000 people were infected, 8,500 died. UN peacekeepers are said to have brought cholera to Haiti. So far, the UN has rejected demands for compensation. It pledges to raise $2 billion to fight the epidemic. However, thousands of victims have filed a class action suit. From Haiti to New York, our reporters are investigating this scandal that's rocked the United Nations.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
Sports. 100 meters individual medley for the United States. France 24 keeps you up to date with all the latest from the world of sport. All the action, all the results, all the emotion.
Join Dan Levy for his sport roundup on France 24 and France24.com.